Before Dawn is a 1951 World War II film directed by Anatole Litvak and stars Richard Basehart, Gary Merrill, Oskar Werner, and Hildegard Knef. This is my first review of a proper war film, a genre I really appreciate but for whatever reason haven't watched very many of for a while now. Previously I've reviewed Since You Went Away, which qualifies as well, but not in quite the same way. But Decision Before Dawn was not what I was expecting, and that's not a bad thing. I found the plot of this movie very surprising because it takes a couple of interesting twists before settling into the main thrust of the narrative. I knew very little about the story going in, just that it focused on the Allies using German prisoners of war as spies to go back into Germany as it became increasingly more difficult, I think they even say in the movie, impossible, to get their own spies into the country. It's apparently based on true events, the details of which were still classified at the time, and also based on a novel entitled Call It Treason by George Howe. The movie opens with an American officer, played by Richard Basehart, joining his new unit, a military intelligence group that has devised this plan to use prisoners in this way. And shortly after, the recruitment process begins as they look for volunteers to work for the Americans. The leader of this unit is played by Gary Merrill, who I guess I haven't seen in a movie for quite a while because his voice sounded so familiar, but not his face. And then it came to me that he speaks a lot like Robert Taylor, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, at this point I was beginning to suspect we might be in for a Dirty Dozen style men on a mission movie, with a ragtag band joining together to fight as one after the initial tensions and tempers simmer down. I got that idea in part because the first man they interview is a criminal, more than happy to fight against his native country if it means getting out of prison. And some other scenes showing the men being trained still had me believing my guess was correct. But then the central mission of the movie is laid out, and we realize it's only going to focus on three men. Richard Basehart's character of Lieutenant Rennick, the ex-criminal recruit codenamed Tiger, and a young German soldier captured by Rennick himself, codenamed Happy. Rennick and Tiger will be working together, negotiating the surrender of a general, and Happy will be alone, tasked with finding the 11th Panzer Corps. The three men parachute into Germany, and at this point I thought I definitely figured it out. We'd be cutting back and forth between these two coinciding missions, eventually drawing the group back together for a thrilling finale. And I was partly right. The majority of this film centers on Happy, played by Oskar Werner, and what at first seemed like a training, preparing for the big mission type of story, transitions into an almost completely different style of movie, one that's much more contemplative, more thoughtful, and that comes courtesy of who becomes the main character. We're introduced to Happy and another man getting caught and taken prisoner, and right away he's different than we might be used to seeing the enemy soldiers in war movies being portrayed. He thanks Rennick for how he's treated him and his friend. Rennick, for his part, pretty much dismisses him, pays him no attention, and we revisit this character several times during the opening act, and the turning point comes when his friend, who has volunteered to work for the Americans, is killed by other, more loyal prisoners. The impact of this on, I keep calling him Happy, his character's real name is Carl Moorer. The impact on him is immediate and definite. He realizes the cruelty that so many of his countrymen have espoused and wants to fight against that. So he volunteers as well, and Rennick still doesn't trust him, or any of these volunteers really. And it's a credit to the movie that we're able to identify with Happy and get behind him. Movie audiences, less so now, but especially at the time, were probably very used to treating all German characters in war films as the enemy. The war had only ended a handful of years earlier. But Oskar Werner gives us a performance that shows his earnestness, his idealism, and a need to do good in some way. And in contrast to Tiger, I never had any feeling that Happy might turn on the Americans once he was back in Germany. You can sense the character's commitment and need to follow through. Tiger, by his own admission, wants to finish the war on the winning side, and hopefully profit by it in some way. So his loyalty is tenuous at best, no matter who he's fighting alongside. I thought the choice of having these two opposite types of characters being the two main Germans was excellent, and is only the first example of how this movie portrays the people of Germany in a nuanced way. Once Happy is back in Germany, he encounters a wide variety of people, and what I found so interesting is that it feels as though we're following an outsider, despite the character returning to his home country. He's been away for a while already, and his loyalties have since changed, so it makes sense, and it pulls us even more to his side. The people he comes in contact with, again, represent many different types, and I'm guessing is fairly accurate. He meets soldiers who are dedicated to the cause, sure they will win the war, and you know they wouldn't hesitate to kill Happy if they found out his true purpose. And then there are those who fear the Nazis and have come to realize the evil that lies there. And many are just struggling to survive, such as Hildegard Knef's character. She has a standout moment when she is explaining her backstory to Happy, and it's tragic. I won't give away details here, but her performance is quite impassioned. Also, what was maybe my favorite part of the whole movie was when he just ends up running across the commandant of the 11th Panzer Corps, bringing him closer to completing his mission. That's something I found interesting, how we almost forget about the mission at certain points as we follow this character who's almost our guide through wartime Germany, and then the story of the movie comes back into play at crucial moments. But back to the commandant, Colonel Oberst von Ecker, who is in need of medical treatment. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that Happy is a medic, and when this is learned, he is commandeered into briefly becoming this man's personal physician. Those scenes were fascinating to watch, in large part because of O.E. Hasse's performance, which I thought was just great. He embodied the role, and you can tell doesn't see himself as a villain, even though we first meet him sentencing a man to death for desertion because he was caring for his children, I believe. He's very businesslike and justifies the cruelties that he's dishing out. That relationship between von Ecker and Happy was so interesting and actually had a biblical comparison for me, that of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. As in that story, this is a powerful, older man, you could say an evil man, who grows very fond of a young man put in his charge, and is in the position to show mercy to him, and vice versa in this case. It was during this scene that the movie's title became clear, I think. Von Ecker explains to him what medication he requires if he suffers an attack. I believe it's a heart attack. The accents are pretty strong. And of course, that same night, before dawn, Happy is awakened by the sounds of Von Ecker thrashing around in his bed, in desperate need of help. And Happy has to choose what he will do. It's quite a tense scene, and you can see the emotional wrangling that is going on inside him. And this whole sequence takes place in a castle, or a grand house of some kind, that has been taken over by the Nazis for a headquarters. I love the juxtaposition of the commandant's little cot and overturned crate for a nightstand in the middle of this huge, lavish room. And that brings me to all of the locations in this film. I believe it was all shot on location in Germany, and again, this is not that long after the war, and the country was nowhere near recovered. So this movie serves as something of a time capsule. Happy travels through so many areas devastated by destruction. Huge piles of rubble are still everywhere. Streets are demolished, but there are also still beautiful areas with rows of houses untouched. But the whole scene is overrun by soldiers and activity. It's really gorgeously shot in black and white, and I'm so glad they used real locations. Recreating these visuals would never have come anywhere close, and the realism and grit of what we're seeing adds so much atmosphere and enhances the performances. These locations are also put to great use once Happy's identity is eventually discovered and he goes on the run. The shots of him racing through the streets are incredible. At one point he's hiding in basically a husk of what was once a theater. The movie as a whole becomes increasingly more suspenseful, and I really didn't know what to predict for the ending. At that point, I had been proven wrong enough times, so I didn't even try. Without spoiling things too much, it is a very dramatic ending, and the final scene is great. The same way the Germans were depicted, the Americans are shown in a complex way as well, with Richard Basehart in particular going through a very interesting character arc. His last moments in the movie are to the point and very well acted. Just for a moment, I want to mention the director, Anatole Litvak. Obviously, I think the direction here was great, but upon looking through his filmography, I realized I've only seen a few of his movies. Sorry Wrong Number, Anastasia, and The Amazing Dr. Clitterhouse. But it looks like I have a bunch of his movies in my collection that I have yet to see. So after this, that is going to have to change. The Long Night and The Snake Pit top the list, but also Castle on the Hudson and 5 Miles to Midnight are not far behind. I'm not sure how well remembered Decision Before Dawn is. Upon its initial release, I know it was nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, but since then, I feel like it might have slipped into obscurity. And if it has, I think it was about time it was rediscovered, if you can find it. Even if just for the chance to see post-war Germany in this way, but also the great performances, especially Oskar Werner. He's a stoic character, doesn't betray his inner feelings too quickly, but there is an undeniable humanity to him that makes for a wonderful character. In case there's any doubt, I recommend this movie. Thanks so much for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, please visit my channel, Hildegard Productions. Adios for now.